So we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Dunn. I'm the social worker and program coordinator with Alzheimer Services. Thank you all so much for being here today. The month of November, we honor Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. And so this year in our virtual world, we're trying a little something new. We're going to have our Q&A panel here today. We have a panel of just local experts. Such an honor to have them with us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody, and then I want to have as much time as possible for the panelists to answer questions and everything like that. Just before I introduce everybody, I want y'all to know that we did have a good number of questions submitted ahead of time, but if you have questions during the presentation that you think of, go ahead and enter them in the chat box. Gina and I are both monitoring the chat box. So you can add questions in as they come. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to just take a second to introduce our moderator and our panel. We have the wonderful Miss Gina Rossi here today as our moderator. We have Miss Terry Robillard. She is a former caregiver for her mother. We have Miss Paula Oder, an attorney from Lineage Law. Dr. John McClelland, who is a current caregiver for his wife. Sergeant Elvin Howard of the East Baton Rouge Police Department. And Dr. Jeffrey Keller from Pennington Biomedical Center. So I'm going to let Gina take over, and thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I want to remind everybody to go ahead and put your mics on mute, because otherwise the other members will hear. So please put your mics on mute. There you go. Well, thank you. Ellen, Alzheimer Services, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored you chose me for this role. I want to say that we're going to get to a lot of questions this morning, today, and luckily we have some really great experts in the community, as you mentioned. In honor of November being Alzheimer's Awareness Month, I want to remind everybody that it's also Family Caregivers Month this month. So to recognize our caregivers who give so much in terms of what they provide to us in the community and to our country, they fill in such a large need, and they take on a very large responsibility. And we know that many of our caregivers are the experts. I mean, you all have been doing this, you've been working, with your loved ones, family and friends. So we will often look to you for what has worked best with you. I want to go ahead and start off with asking some of the caregivers that we have today, Terry and Dr. McClelland, a couple of questions that we could start off with you. I know that many of the caregivers, one of the things that is most useful to them is to hear how other caregivers have dealt with things. This, of course, is one of the beauties and the benefits of our support group as well. If I can start off with Dr. McClelland, can you please tell us what are some of the challenges that you faced as a caregiver in relation to the pandemic?
Well, yes. First of all, just being a caregiver for an Alzheimer's a patient or relative is unique in itself. It's a very unique and demanding kind of a specialized situation, particularly if it's a member of your family. It can be it can add an emotional factor, which is very, very challenging. And you're already kind of set apart from many things by the unique demands of the disease and of the caregiver. So there's an element of isolation already present in your day-to-day life. And then to your question, particularly when you add the COVID-19 restrictions, you've got a double layering effect of removal from normalcy, from people and interaction and that type of thing. And so it makes it more challenging to fill a day, and to not only for the Alzheimer's patient, but also the caregiver who is already limited by what they can or can't do in terms of personal time or whatever. Then their options have been cut back by the societal limitations of the virus. So it's a double whammy. It becomes very much a tough challenge.
What has been helpful? Have you found anything, any kind of tips that you could share with other people that has been helpful to you?
I think you have to just try to find things that you can do on your own for yourself and for the Alzheimer's patient. And you may have to change your relaxing activities. You know, you have to read more or find a new game to play because you can't go out. You can't get away because you're there, and you have to just kind of really. It's a challenge to find things to occupy your time. Take up a new hobby at home, a new book, something you meant to do, or a closet you've been meaning to clean out. I mean, that's what I found myself doing was this and that. You know, every blade of grass in my yard was cut 3 times over. But, you know, I don't know what else. You know, it's kind of that kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Well, you're right. It is the responsibility that a caregiver has is their usual role, and then there's this additional layer of the COVID situation that makes things. Certainly, caregivers have to be the most flexible in the situation. It's been very, very difficult to the caregivers I've talked to as well. I'd like to talk to Terry. Terry, we would be interested of any tips that you might be able to share as you look back on your caregiving journey. What was the best tip that you could share with current caregivers?
Well, to look back on the journey, first of all, I agree with John that this is a new time. This is totally new, and tips that really worked and benefit and helped in my time with caregiving with my mom it's different. The isolation now that we are, you know, presents a problem where really the best time was spending the time with your loved one. You know what I'm saying? Just to not have them feel or be isolated. So one of the tips I would at this time would be just to spend time with them, pick your battles, because we are spending more time now with them and than when I was personally caregiving. When I say pick your battles, I would, you know, in the same way, you can't beat them, join them, you know. Don't be so forceful in the ideas of changing them to what you would like to do or what you would like to say during that time, and just kind of go with the flow as to what they want to do and what they want to say. To just kind of go in that area, not try to crowd their minds with remembering. Let's just go with what you remember now and enjoy that time. Let's build on that.
That is exactly what fits in with a lot of the training that Alzheimer's does with caregivers, especially with new caregivers who are struggling with this, is to not to be into the place where the loved one is, and
Right.
to not force a specific schedule if you don't have to. You know, schedules are good, but as much as you can, reach into where they are at that time. And you really, you hit the nail on the head with that. If there was anything, I mean, if you can think of anything in the past that you would have done differently, what would that be? Was there a particular situation or family situation? And recognize that a lot of caregivers too are often trying to reach out to family members for help or support. And some of them struggle with that. You know, how many times do they go back to reach out? What if it's not working? Think about that too. Are there any situations that you would have done differently?
Well, one of the things I would have done differently would have basically what I said earlier, not really try to, you know, we reach out and trying to help them so much we're trying to, we remember them as they were. And we put so much emphasis in that. But I would, if I could do it differently, I would just, like I say, I would basically go with where she is now. You know, what she's remembering, even though it may not make sense to me, what I'm hearing or what she's doing, if it brings her peace, enjoyment, that's what I would enhance on. Because they do remember certain things and that we may not remember or even think they're important. So I would pick up on what she's remembering and make it important. you know, that's value the time. You know,
You're
it's not so much is what she's remembering, but that she's here and she's doing what she's doing. Value that time and you enjoy it with her. That's what I would do.
and it sounds like that was something that you did need a little bit of time to learn about as well.
Oh,
And
definitely.
and I say that because I see so many caregivers that are very hard and judgmental on themselves. And they work so hard at being a good caregiver that they don't realize that some of this, takes some time to get into, to be more into the role and to learn these things. And certainly there are services to help them learn, to give them tips, but to really not be hard, because there's always some things, kind of like being a parent, I guess. There's always something that they think they should have done better, or they wish they hadn't have done, or, they would have done differently. I'd like to know from Dr. McClelland or you, Terry, if you could talk a little bit about, what you would do differently in terms of family members to help or support you, if that was something that you wished you had done more of, or how did you reach out? Would either one of you speak to that?
Well, I tried very hard to get family members to get involved. And at the beginning of the journey, that's hard because in order for them to really reach out and get involved, the family member will have to become aware of what was actually going on with your loved one. And a lot of time I found out that was a brick wall because there's a denial there. Everybody is not acceptable. Knowledge is something that would be very helpful with Alzheimer's service, giving me knowledge of what exactly my mom was going through. So to get knowledge of it, you're better at working with it and making her as comfortable in it as possible. And with family members, you can't find, I'm not saying don't reach out to them, constantly reach out to them, because
Okay.
you get to value that time is short. And this is very hard. This is a hard challenge, a hard journey to travel. And the more support and love of the family members, so much better. It's so much easier. And now with the distance, the social distancing, I would suggest maybe more conversation on the phone, more Zoom, more meetings, but always reach out. I mean, I did it from the beginning of the journey to the end.
Good.
Letting them know what was going on, keeping them informed as to what was happening with mom in the different stages that she were in, inviting, come see, come help, just to love on them.
Good.
While they're here to be loved on.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a good reminder that to don't quit, because maybe at first there might be some denial. It may take some time, but don't stop reaching out. How about you, Dr. McClelland? Do you, in your situation with your family, is this something that you found difficult to address with other family members, or did you have support? What would you recommend to people who are struggling with this issue?
Well, I would agree with what Terry said. There's nothing easy about the journey, and if family members are available, locally or close by, then certainly encourage their involvement, because can be a key source for the caregiver in terms of relief and interaction. But the family also has to go through this acceptance and understanding what they're dealing with, and it's a very unique challenge, as we've already said, and it takes everybody time to kind of reach their own level of comfort with it. But no, I would just say remain open. And one thing that I had to realize in my situation, my wife's had this disease now for 10 years, and she developed it when she was 57 years old. So she was still pretty young, and it was unusual to have it at that young age. And my children didn't understand what was going on for a long time with the disease. And then, so you have to realize, but being the caregiver, you have to oftentimes have to intervene between the patient and your family, because not everybody can, I mean, everybody has to help each other. And certainly different people have different levels of acceptance and understanding and ability to cope with that. You know, not everybody wants to be around it. So you see that situation with family and friends, and they want to help, but they just don't know how to help. So you have to encourage them in ways that makes them comfortable and understand the situation, and keep a sense of peace about the circumstance. And I realized that became one of my responsibilities to my family members, children, and so forth.
So your wife was very young when she was diagnosed, 57.
It was a pretty classic young onset Alzheimer's disease, right?
Were there any signs that that you started, or that you looking back, that you could pick up on that there was something going on with her?
This is all in retrospect, of course, but I mean, yes, things like all of a sudden the bills weren't getting paid, and she always paid the bills, and that's one obvious example of it. Looking back, that's what was going on then. Or she would go, leave in her car to go somewhere, and then she wouldn't come back, and I would not know where she was, and she wouldn't communicate, and she'd wander in a little later, and there was like everything was okay. But getting lost, or people would call and she would remember the phone calls, couldn't find the keys, dressing patterns changed, she wouldn't quite finish getting dressed like she usually would, and that type of thing. But then things progressed, and you figure out something's really not right here. Then you pursue it. But those telltale signs early on were, those type of things. And when somebody forgets their car keys, instantly think that they've got some type of a dementia problem. But over time, as these things progress, then you have to do something else.
You mentioned that she would go out, and she would, it'd take a while and get lost. And that brings me up to a subject I'd like to hear from our police department, Sergeant Howard. I'd like to talk to you a little bit, if you could share with the group and the viewers, what is the process when somebody, when they call and say they believe that one of their family members is lost, and they have dementia. Tell us a little bit about what your department does for that process.
Yeah, first I would like to thank Ellen for inviting us to participate, and also you, Gina, for moderating this important topic. Caregivers, I really have a special part in my heart for the caregivers, because my mom is a caregiver, and she took care of my father when he was dealing with pancreatic cancer, and she's now a caregiver for my 92-year-old grandmother. But she doesn't have dementia or anything right now, thank God. But it's a difficult thing to deal with, and I can imagine that if added, the dementia or Alzheimer's, it makes it even harder to do that. So I thank you guys, and you're a godsend. The police department do not have a written, the Baton Rouge Police Department don't have a written procedure to my knowledge, but it basically comes from training and experience, that you have to deal with the situation as it is at that time. And one thing that we have to do is we have to remember that we need to speak and to treat them very gently, and try to keep them calm, seek assistance from other resources if necessary, such as EMS or capital area human service. Typically, officers request assistance from EMS if at all possible, to assist with dealing with that person. Officers would deal with individual situations at hand while remaining cognizant that the person is not thinking clearly and may not understand what is happening in that moment. So we have to be aware of the fact that we're not dealing with someone who have normal thought processes and treat them that way. One thing that we have training. Our officers go through a 40-hour crisis intervention training, which also deals with people with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's taught by the Capital Area Human Services in Baton Rouge, and it helps us to understand and recognize those things that I just spoke of, and knowing that every situation is different. That's the difficult part about police work, that every person that we encounter, we don't always get the information. So it's very important that the person who's calling in for assistance let dispatch know, or let the call taker know that this person is suffering from dementia and of the behaviors that they've dealt with this person, so that the officer, when he goes to that scene, he will have all the information to know what he's dealing with and how to deal with it.
So there's not a written policy, and the reason for that is that it really requires a lot of flexibility and fluidity depending on the situation, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, ma'am. And just like all cases, well, I know we're speaking on dementia and Alzheimer's right now, but it's really difficult to put something on paper to say this is how you should handle it, knowing that every situation, I can deal with two people with the same disease. They both may have dementia, but one thing may trigger one and won't trigger the other. So it's kind of difficult, other than knowing that when we get to a scene where we where we are dealing with someone with those diseases, that get someone else there, someone else that's EMS. We do have a direct line to Capital Area Human Services. We work over there, so we have people that we can call directly, and we can say that, look, this is what we're dealing with. Could you send someone over here to help us deal with that person? Because all those incidents are not really law enforcement issues, unless, of course, it becomes violent or something like that. We just want it to be handled in a very smart and conscious way. So a lot of times law enforcement we're on one level when we're dealing, we may just be coming from a call where someone is actually violent because of whatever reason, and then turn around and go to that call and have to actually tone down, our senses at that time.
I see. Now, there is in many communities what we call the silver alert. Is that something that the Baton Rouge Police Department, do they use that as a model, or what do you know about that?
Well, Silver Alert is an issue statewide by the state itself, and but it could be forwarded to the police department through BRPD email. In other words, if we get a Silver Alert, we may send out a blast to BRPD Swarm, which is the entire police department, to let them know that there is a Silver Alert for a specific person, and or through dispatch if requested. If there's a situation where that person that we're dealing with is at this location or whatever, it may be a dispatch call where law enforcement actually dispatched out to that scene, off of that Silver Alert. So we do use it, but it's a statewide a statewide blog that's put out, and we just utilize it at that time.
So is the family member, can they request a Silver Alert?
Yes, ma'am. Well, it's once that dispatcher or whoever takes that call, they're the ones who are going to determine whether a Silver Alert is put out or not. Okay. By the information that they receive. Now they can give them the information to let them know what's going on, and that call taker is going to determine whether the civil alert should be put out or not.
So as I understand it, the family member or person responsible can ask for one, but it's the dispatcher that will use that information and then make the determination and send it out.
Yes, ma'am.
I gotcha. Okay, very good. You talked a little bit about training, and I hear you saying that you have the crisis prevention training. Is there any other training specific to dementia that the department learns about?
Well, a lot of it is not specific to dementia, or a lot of it, we have training like communication techniques for working
Good.
with older adults. That's a course that's offered by Post. Now I can't confirm how many officers have gone through it, but it's offered. And then we also have law enforcement and elderly. That's a Post mandated for the Basic Training Academy, which means that when you join a police department, that is a part of your basic training that you will get. And also crisis intervention when dealing with individuals with mental illness and emotional disturbances. All of it kind of fit along the same veil as dealing with someone with dementia, Alzheimer's. That also is mandated by the Basic Training Academy, courses that officers must complete when they join the police department.
So strong focus on communication and how to communicate.
Oh my God, it's the most important thing that you have to complete when you're dealing with these people who may have dementia or Alzheimer's. It's communication, body language, and information. Information is the most important thing, and those caregivers and those people who deal with these people on a daily basis. They can give us valuable information on how to deal with them. They're the ones who are going to help that officer deal with that person the way they should be dealt with. They may be at that time, they may need law enforcement to assist them because that person may have gotten out of hand or are uncontrollable. But without them advising us how to deal with that person, it becomes very difficult. So it's very, very important for the loved ones and the people who deal with them on a daily basis to let us know what kind of triggers or what kind of issues that they've dealt with them in the past.
And that just made me think of a question, and maybe you may not be able to answer this right now, but just as a thought, is there a way to keep a number? Is there a way to know what the average number of calls related to this is? Because it might be good for for us to know at some point. And if you don't know, it's fine, but that might be something up for discussion, is how are you tracking what types of calls are related to this?
Yes, we actually do have a statistician that could that have that information. I don't currently have it. I tried to reach out to get it prior to this panel, but we do keep up with certain type of calls. Now, I'm not sure if it's that detailed as to dementia or Alzheimer's. It may be emotionally disturbed person calls. Some calls are labeled that, and when we get it, it may be labeled as an EDP, which is an emotionally disturbed person. But when we get there, we find out that it's dementia. And so we may not change it at that time on that call. So it still may be logged in as an emotionally disturbed person. So to answer your question though, I don't have the exact numbers,
sure.
But I know that we deal with a lot of emotionally disturbed persons on a daily basis, especially in the North Baton Rouge and some of the South Baton Rouge area, but especially in the North Baton Rouge area. We deal with that a lot and almost on a daily basis. But again, it may not be because of dementia or Alzheimer's.
I understand. I think that is helpful information. One question that somebody asked is this a 911 call? I mean, to many of us, so many of everything's a 911 call to you. If you're in the moment. But how would you prefer that the call be called in to the police department regular call-in number or as a 911 number?
I would prefer it. Well, it depends on the situation. I would personally prefer it to be a non-emergency call, called in at 389-2000 directly to our dispatch, instead of 911. 911 is the emergency call, and it's especially in situations where it's not violent. They just may not be listening or something like that. You don't want. Usually, when we get a 911 call, if we don't get all the information, officers are going over there in 911 mode, emergency mode. And that's one thing that we don't want to happen. If you do dial 911, I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you do dial 911, please make sure that everyone gives as much complete information as possible. I can't stress that enough. As I spoke to earlier, we need as much information. That is the most important thing for that officer when he goes to that scene. If that person is not violent, if that person don't have any weapons, if that person doesn't have any violence in their past, in their history, we need to know that. If they
Be
do,
very clear about that. Be very clear that this is not a violent person, and
right, right, very, 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 very important. Now, if they are violent and they have a history of violence, we need to know that also. The main thing is for the officer to have as much information as possible. Dealing with, from my experience, I mean, I'm a 23-year-old vet on the police department. I'm not currently in uniform patrol, but when I was in uniform patrol, from my experience, people that have dementia or Alzheimer's and are not violent. So that's how that officer should go to that scene, knowing that if that information comes in that this person has dementia or Alzheimer's, well, of course we have to be safe, and of course we have to be aware of what we're going into. But if that's the information we're going into, we have to go into that cognizant of the fact that that's what we're dealing. We're dealing with someone with dementia that may be confused instead of someone who's violent or trying to hurt someone.
thank you. That's good information, and things that, as family members, when things happen, it's often a crisis, an emergency. But if we continually review in our minds, what would be the process, it helps a little bit more to, have thoughts. Something it's like CPR. If you know it, you tell it yourself and you do it, that's how you will react, hopefully.
Right.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to a little bit now about some of the research that's being done. And we're lucky to have Dr. Keller here as a panelist from Pennington Biomedical. Dr. Keller, what at the top of everybody's mind always is, they want to know is, what are some of the new research studies happening in Pennington, but also in the nation or in a global way? What is what is it looking like that's most hopeful? That's more advanced in terms of all the trials. Would you speak to that?
Sure. I want to, as Mr. Howard said, thank everybody for inviting me and for everybody attending. And you, Gina, it's nice to see you again. Appreciate your assistance with this. Just a couple of quick things I think that I could help clarify. So the research in, I apologize, the light in my office went out for some reason. So here in the dark. But we nationwide, there are almost 200 FDA reviewed studies that are going on for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease or the prevention of Alzheimer's disease in mild cognitively impaired individuals. And these studies range from experimental medications to different interventions with physical activity, currently approved medications for off-label use, so repurposing medications, and a variety of behavior based interventions. And and I can talk to that just to help clarify sort of where we're at with that, and then talk about where things are going and then what's going on here locally, if you'd like.
Sure, we have some time.
Okay, so with regards to the Alzheimer's prevention and Alzheimer's treatment trials that are experimental medications. So there was a lot of interest we're still targeting these same biomarkers called tau and beta amyloid. There are proteins in the brain that are appear to be necessary, but in certain instances can be converted into something that is negatively impacts the brain's ability to function. And there's a class of drugs called biologics that are monoclonal antibodies that are like Humira that's out there that's used for arthritis and inflammation. There are biologics that are targeting tau and beta amyloid. And they received a lot of press recently because of the study that was pulled from Biogen and Asahi back in March of 2019. The study was ceased because they weren't meeting their endpoints. And then in October 2019, they said that even though the study didn't succeed, that patients that got the highest dose of these biologics, that they saw benefit. And just last week, the FDA said, no, these are no longer 10 of the 11 members of the FDA review said that these are not approved for Alzheimer's use, even at the high dose. And so that just is a long-winded way to say that we still are far away in terms of finding experimental treatments for prevention or treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And it's largely due to the fact of we don't know what to target. And the traditional targets of tau and beta amyloid appear to be perhaps not correct targets. And there's a lot of revamping going on in that area. Now, in terms of experimental medications to help with consequences of Alzheimer's disease, there's a lot of progress being made. So in terms of medications that are being studied to help with agitation, which is like Mr. Howard with the police force was talking about, there's a lot of good progress being made there, and some drugs that are likely to come on the market to help improve the management of agitation in individuals with dementia. And in the area of sleep, so medications that don't dangerously sedate the individual with Alzheimer's disease, but truly help with sleep. That's another area that is being, we're seeing good advances on. And I would think in the next year to 2 years, you'll see more advertisements on TV, and when you can talk to your doctor about improvements there. What we're doing locally is part of a movement that is happening nationally, where we're looking at controlling risk factors for developing dementia. And so we're part of the largest, there are 4 studies as part of 4 sites as part of an NIH funded study looking at the control of blood pressure as a way to reduce dementia risk. And that study is being completed next June. It was a 5-year study. And so the results of that will be published and reported at the end of 2021. I can't say too much about that yet, but there's another study that we have going on that we're part of 6 sites that's funded by the NIH, looking at the ability to control glycemic control to prevent dementia. And so this is where we're being very aggressive in controlling glucose levels in people that are pre-diabetic. And because essentially hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, these are not just risk factors for the heart or the liver or the kidney or stroke. They're also risk factors for the development of dementia. And so it appears that the getting these factors under control has benefits towards the prevention or delay of developing a dementia in later life. And we are also very much at Pennington we will always have studies for Alzheimer's treatment, as well as Alzheimer's prevention using experimental medications. The studies that we are currently enrolling where we will be enrolling in January of next year for our the study where we're using metformin in people that are pre-diabetic. It's called the MAP study. That will be starting in January of 2021. We also have a new study that we're doing with Merck to develop new tools so that we can monitor and we can detect dementia in the home. So the ability to not require people to come into the clinic to be diagnosed with dementia, but to be able to carry out these assessments and measures in the home. And that study is going to be starting in January of next year. We have an NIH grant with UT Austin, University of Texas, Austin, where we are, again, developing a new technology to help doctors in the emergency room setting and in the hospital setting be able to quickly diagnose Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And that study will be beginning early next year, where we need people that are a variety of cognitive levels, normal, middle, people that are having some beginning of cognitive impairment as well as dementia. And the last thing that I'll say is for everybody that's been participating in our Louisiana Aging Brain Study, we've had 4,000 people over the years that have participated in that, where they come into the clinic. We're moving that entire study online starting after Thanksgiving. And so we've developed cognitive assessments and measures so that people in their home can be able to get the screening and to participate in research without having to come to our clinic. COVID has been devastating for research. And I won't go into all the details, but it's not just the so few slots in the clinic to see patients, but we have people that have been coming to us for 10 plus years that just simply don't want to come to a clinic anymore unless it's for their care. And so we're being very aggressive in developing technologies. Luckily, I was ahead of the curve on this, and we've been developing them for years and trying to explain to people why it's important to do assessments in the home and remotely. And now I don't have to sell that anymore. It's obvious to everybody that we need that. And so that's what you're going to see more out of Pennington and other places, is the ability to monitor things in the home. And so that people, like we were hearing from Dr. McClelland, it's so difficult to get these people out and about, and anything we can do to try to keep the caregiver burden at a minimum is great. If I might just mention one last thing, and I'll be quiet, is we've also taken some of these Pennington technologies and developed them for the physicians. And so we've been lucky enough to be able to license and have in use now in Arizona and Louisiana, the ability for doctors to conduct dementia assessments and develop care plans using our tools that were developed here at Pennington. And we're real excited about that as well. And I think you're going to see technology playing more and more of a role in geriatric care and dementia care in particular.
Wow, lots of work by you and your team and Pennington and all those associations with NIH. I have a question about specifically about the University of Texas, your collaboration with NIH to help the doctors in the ER. Now, is this, when you said it was about Alzheimer, diagnosing Alzheimer's, is any of this related to behavioral, techniques or how you do an assessment? There are so many different, Alzheimer's assessments or dementia assessments that we're taught. Which ones would, number one, I'd be interested in hearing from you about which ones do you think are the best, but also about this, your work with the University of Texas at Austin about working with ER doctors.
Yeah, so that particular tool, it works on asking certain questions to the patients that deals with the different aspects of cognitive function. So we're asking them to remember things and to carry out specific tasks and describing specific tasks. And believe it or not, it actually works with the word patterns and speech recognition to start to make determinations of the presence of dementia and to distinguish that from problems with word finding and other types of things. And you're absolutely right on. Things are moving more towards ecological testing. That's where instead of you coming to the clinic, you'll just get an email or a text and be asked some questions or asked to do some things at random times, several days in a row, perhaps one day a week, perhaps one day every 6 months. And that's becoming a better way, we see, instead of having someone stress out, come to the clinic and have papers pushed in front of them. It's sometimes better just to be measuring these things where people are normally out and about. We also have a study that we're doing with several groups where we're actually looking at driving. And so it turns out that we have a study where you can, you just participate in these remote studies. And if you want to, we can load an app onto your phone, and you load that app onto your phone, and it, whether your phone's on or off, kind of scary for a lot of people, but if it's on or off, it measures risky driving behaviors. And we're looking at that in relation to what we're seeing in terms of cognition and caregiver reports. And it turns out that these things that we do every day change over time in ways that we can't perceive until there's been a big change, like a roadblock or some new challenge. And that's when people get lost, like we were hearing from Mr. Howard and Dr. McClelland. But it turns out that there's subtle changes that happen over time that actually start to distinguish people from normal aging to mild cognitive impairment to a dementia. And that's one of the big things we're working on. The goal would be you don't have to come to a clinic. You are able to just go about your day and be able to find out about your health and risk and things just by you doing what you normally do.
So, so the research with an app, is that something going on right now?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Gina, it's and like I said, after Thanksgiving, we're going to promote about the web, we call it Web LaBrains. So you can, for free, just participate in research and find out about future research studies and get your screening and your different assessments all delivered online. And then you can choose to volunteer if you want, not necessary to be involved in this driving study that we have. And and like I said, we have a blood pressure study, I'm sorry, a metformin study for glucose control, and they'll be starting in January and February for older people who are concerned about their memory but don't have dementia. And all of these will be, say, coming online. I would like to say that also for resources, the National Institutes of Aging has a wonderful website for caregiver information and different lifestyle changes and caregiver tools and training that's really amazing. And the Banner Institute is another great resource out in Arizona. They have a lot of different information and resources for people.
Okay, definitely going to write that down. So if somebody, you said Web LaBrains, is that the site that somebody would go to sign up to be in the research? Where would they go?
If anybody is interested in learning anything about what I just said or learning more information, perhaps Mrs. Dunn can provide them my contact information. I'm happy to do that. Or they can email us at dementia@pbrc.edu. So that's dementia at P as in Pennington Biomedical Research Center, so pbrc.edu.
Okay. And when you say older adults, tell me what's the youngest side of older adults that would be eligible for the studies?
We don't discriminate, so 40 and up.
40 and up. Okay. So there should be plenty of room, and I know plenty of people will have recommendations for the driving app for somebody to go on that.
Yeah, that's been a fascinating project.
Thank you so much for this update. This is so all of you, if you're interested, go to dementia.pbrc.edu and you can get a lot of good information there. I am really interested in going to the Banner Institute, and I'm familiar with the NIA website. They do have some very good information. So very good. Thank you so much. that's a lot. And we might process, as I'm processing this, we might come up with some more questions. Let me see if there's any other questions in the chat box related to this. But I'll tell you what, before I go to the chat box, I'd like to hear about what are some of the legal challenges that come up for people. And we have an attorney here. Thank you so much for coming. We would like to hear some more from Paula. And Paula, you, in your experience, you've probably worked with a lot of caregivers, maybe who are new to this experience, or some, unfortunately, who are middle or on the late stages, and they're now in a bit of a crisis trying to catch up. But with this, most of our persons on this webinar today are caregivers. Would you speak a little bit about, what is, like, for example, what is the one act that a family member can do right now, either with or without an attorney, that would be the most significant, say the biggest bang for their buck?
Powers of attorney, and for themselves, for their loved one, if the disease has not progressed far enough, especially in the times of COVID right now, where we're seeing it can be harder and harder to get access to someone who's in the medical system. I'm an estate planning attorney, so a lot of people think of that as wills and trusts and things, but truly from my practice, the scarier question is not what if I die, it's what if I live. So there are some defaults of law. There's a hierarchy of who can make your medical decisions for you if you can't. By default of law, we have our spouses, our children, our relatives are listed in a hierarchy. Now that may not be who you want to take care of you. I have a client who it would have fallen to her mother, and she said, my mother is the exact wrong person to take care of me. And it was a different diagnosis. She had leukemia, and thankfully her prognosis was good and she came through it. But she knew she needed to get her plan done. She was a young mom with a young son. And it just didn't work out. And then I got a call and had to go visit her at her hospital bed because she's like, oh my gosh, if anything were to happen to me, I don't have a spouse, my child's a minor, my mother by default of law would be making these decisions for me. And that's not who I want to be making that. So, and thinking about Dr. McClelland, his wife got an early onset diagnosis. In Louisiana, the law requires that a person have capacity to sign the documents. And truly capacity is not a very high threshold. You have to understand what you're signing. You have to understand the effect of the document, and you have to be able to sign it willingly. So it is not uncommon for me to see clients who have received a diagnosis already of dementia, be it Alzheimer's or, the other host of disorders that can give us dementia or that can be debilitating. And sometimes that's that extends to a lot of different conditions. I mentioned my client who was diagnosed with leukemia. So it's rare for me to have to turn somebody away. I had one lady who came with her mom in tow, and the mom couldn't answer any of my questions. I pointed to her daughter and said, who is this? And she said, that's me. And she thought her daughter was the pet cat. So clearly that's somebody who doesn't have capacity. But for somebody, if it's early or sometimes even midway in the progression of the disease, they can still have capacity. If I can look at them and they understand that they're signing a document that's going to allow, the person sitting next to them to make financial and medical decisions for them, we can go ahead and do that. And that is, gosh, that is so important. And you don't need an attorney to do that. I don't want to overstate my importance. Notary publics can do these documents for you. They have to be signed in front of a notary and 2 witnesses, but you don't have to go and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get these. So from my perspective, that is the most important thing, because like I said, for healthcare decisions, there is a default of law. You can help your spouse with medical decisions. You can help your parents. You can help your children, but there's nothing for finances. So sometimes people get hooked up where, mom needs help paying her bills, and mom's illness has progressed to a point where she doesn't know what the checkbook is. Well, guess what? If you're not a joint owner on the account, if you weren't named as power of attorney, you have some serious problems helping that person manage. And at that point, really, unless you can make some arrangements, which sometimes it happens, but it varies from institution to institution, your only alternative then is an interdiction. And that's a much more difficult process. It's very expensive. It requires a court appearance. It can cause fights in the family. You know, if there's more than one child, oh, I want to be mom's, you know, mom's curator. No, I want to be mom's curator. So my gosh, just the powers of attorney, they're so easy and they can prevent so many problems. And also when we look toward Medicare planning, I mean, I think everyone's goal is that, you know, we grow old and pass away happily in our own homes, in our own beds, surrounded by loved ones. But that doesn't always happen. I see a lot of very stressed out caregivers. They approach me when they're hitting the point where they know they're probably past the point where they should have kept their loved ones at home, but they approach the point where they're at wit's end and they just don't have any energy. They don't have any resources left. And we know it's time to put that person in a nursing home to step up the care that they can receive. And we help with Medicaid planning, where if you have, Medicaid planning. So Medicare is the insurance for seniors that it's a pretty good deal. It pays for our health care. However, it does not pay for long-term nursing home care. It will pay for intermittent care if you're recovering from stroke or heart attack, broken hip, things like that. But it's not going to pay for that long-term nursing home care. Medicaid will, and Medicaid is based on your resources, and we can get people qualified for Medicaid. But again, man, that power of attorney is the linchpin to being able to get somebody qualified for Medicaid. Because if your patient has passed the point where they clearly don't have capacity, they can't dispose of their resources, they can't say who they want in charge. And again, I emphasize these powers of attorney for anybody age 18 or over. You know, none of us is guaranteed a tomorrow. None of us is guaranteed a healthy tomorrow. We have accidents, we have strokes, we have all kinds of things that can happen to us. And it's just, again, it's just such an easy document. And when somebody approaches me they have a loved one who's received a bad diagnosis or something where we know they have some kind of progressive illness, my first question is, do you have the powers of attorney? And then I just immediately take them and tear through them and hope that they have all the provisions that I'm looking for. So that's the most important thing from a legal perspective. That is the keys to the kingdom. That's what's going to be able to give you access and to be able to help your loved one the most, or if you're the person in that situation.
Now, we had one of the viewers ask a question. Somebody wanted to know about a dual power of attorney. She says, can you have a dual power of attorney? I, as a wife, have a POA, but as I age, I'm thinking about my daughter being able to take care of things.
Absolutely. So when we execute a power of attorney, we do it a few different ways. And the first thing, and so some attorneys will put the powers of attorney together. The state looks at you as two parts. You're your person and you are your property. And there's no wrong way to do it. In my practice, I make a separate one. You get one for healthcare and you get one for your property and your finances. Because for one, you may not want the person, it may not be the same person. I had an elderly client and one son was a doctor and one son was a lawyer. Well, guess who was her medical? It was her son who was a doctor, and the one to handle her finances and properties, the son who was a lawyer. So it may not always be the same person. So if by dual she meant one that covers both, you can do it that way and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think what she meant was the person who acts for you is called your agent. And you can absolutely work it however is best for you. When you're thinking about who you want to do this for you, you pick the person whom you trust, who is going to act in your best interest and who's going to honor your wishes. So there are a few ways of selecting it. Most frequently, I see the people in successive order. I pick my friend Cindy. If my friend Cindy can't do it, then I pick my friend John. If John can't do it, then I pick my niece Erica. So we have it in an order that I want this person to serve. If this person can't serve, then the next person moves down the line. My mom, she's 90 years old. She's living alone in Slidell. She does very well. She's unfortunately, several of her children have predeceased her. So it's my brother and I are left. Now he lives in Virginia. His name is Jim and he's a wonderful human being. So for my mothers, it's both of us, whoever would get there first. So it's Paula or Jim can serve. So if she had a medical emergency, of course, I'm physically closer, would get there. But if we needed to handle any banking for her, any medical decisions, anything like that, it's either one of us, it's whoever got there first. And that's with the understanding that he and I are going to communicate. We don't anticipate any problems. For some people, you may want more than one person making the decision. My mother very easily could have said, I want Paula and Jim and they both have to concur. So that's another way of setting it up. So yes, your person whom you go to, either the attorney or the notary, can set that up however you need. And for some folks, that's a comfort. Typically, my typical client is a married person with children. So typically we say, I name my spouse. If my spouse cannot serve, then I name my children. And however you need to name the kids, you know, I see a lot of kind of multi-generational issues with families. We may have somebody who has received a dementia diagnosis and then maybe their kids aren't okay. I see a lot of mental illness in adult children. I see a lot of addiction. I see a lot of adult children who really can't handle their finances. So, and that's a good point to bring up too. And this may sound callous, and I don't mean it to be. I don't care about people's feelings. So if I have someone coming to me who, an older person in need of estate planning, and let's say they've got 2 children, and you know, one child is living in their basement and doesn't pay any of the bills, is terrible with money, and they have one child who did launch, who has a great career, is responsible. Sometimes I have to talk people out of naming those children equally. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to hurt Billy's feelings. It's like, you've got to do what is in your best interest and the interest of your loved one. We can deal with Billy's feelings later. But I always want people to be really cognizant of this is a job. I want you to pick the person who's going to do the best job for you. And sometimes it's a relative, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's a spouse, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's a child, best friend, niece, nephew. The only requirement, again, is somebody you trust and someone who's going to honor your wishes and do the best job for you.
You know, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, that it doesn't have to be an attorney. It can be a notary as well, because one of the questions that we got from a viewer was, can you provide information on resources for individuals who cannot afford legal services? And probably, you know, a notary would be less than an attorney.
Certainly. And there are notaries everywhere.
Okay.
You know, I greatly enjoy my work. I feel like I earn my fees, but if somebody is in a pinch, then no, you don't have to go to an attorney. There are notaries you could stand on a corner and throw a rock and hit a notary. For folks who really are lower on the scale, there are resources. There are legal clinics at the law schools, at LSU and at Southern University locally.
Okay, legal clinics.
And they should be able to help you get an appointment. We have Southeast Legal Services here locally. That system is kind of overwhelmed. It's really busy. It's really sad. There's such a huge need for legal services across the spectrum and accessing the justice system. But for those are 3 options for you, either through Southeast Legal or one of the law clinics at one of the law schools can do that. Or again, I would recommend you see a notary if you don't have time or if money is an issue. Go see a notary and get that done.
Now, sometimes what will happen, and I'll say probably a lot of times what will happen, is there's not a POA, and then there are some caregivers, maybe children, adult children rather, that are working with the parent. And then the siblings, because of the crisis, the dynamics, you know, go back to how it was way back, and they start having their regular old dynamics that are not helpful to the situation. But one caregiver might seek out help, either through the social worker or whoever, and they will say, you know, I'm not getting any help or participation, cooperation from my siblings, and this is all on me. And now my mother is not able to make a decision. What can I do? And I'm also, you know, spending a lot of money on mom, and I'm worried about what's going to happen in the future. And if I put mom in a nursing home, can the nursing home, can they start charging me? You know, what is the adult child, what are they going to be liable for in a situation like that?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. And you brought up a great point, man. If there was a sibling rivalry when we were 6 and 8 years old, that may still come up when we're 56 and 58 years old. That's not really a legal question, but that's something that happens a lot around my conference table. So we just try to communicate with that. I mean, I never want to find a legal solution to that. If it is a legal solution, it's somebody going to court and applying for that interdiction and letting the court decide who is the best caregiver for mom and dad. Fortunately, in my practice, I haven't really encountered that situation, but you ask a great question about the liability. And let me tell you the context in which I get that more often, not so much during the lifetime, but, oh my gosh, my parent or my spouse or whomever burned through all their resources. My parent has left debt. The state will never leave an heir in debt. Now, you may be in a situation where you're not going to inherit anything because the creditors get paid first. The creditor priorities are actually to the attorneys and to the funeral industry. Those are the two people who get priority over anybody if there is a debt, if an estate is upside down. But you should not inherit your parents' debt. You may not inherit anything if there are no assets. If we've paid all the bills and we still have debt, or we've paid all the bills and there's a zero balance, you're not going to inherit anything. But the state should not leave you in debt. The other question is really interesting about, am I financially responsible for my parents? The answer is legally yes, but I've never seen it. So it's actually called alimony. We have a duty to support our parents, believe it or not. It is written in the Louisiana Code. I have never seen a case of it. And we think of alimony in the context of divorce, right? So the state is never going to obligate you to something. I mean, we have a natural obligation to our children, things like that, of course. But for alimony, if you think about it in the context of a divorce, I have to sue somebody for alimony. And the court is going to look and say, okay, the person who's suing, what are their needs? What is their income? What are their assets? And the person from whom you're trying to get support, what is their legal obligation, their natural obligation, maybe even their moral obligation, and what are their means? So I guess I could envision a context where a parent is very, very poor and destitute, and a child is well off, and that parent could sue that child, but I've never seen it in practice. Those cases would be extraordinarily rare, and it doesn't happen without due process. You're not going to be in a situation where your parent goes in a nursing home and you get a bill 2 years later for, $120,000. That should never, ever happen. Again, Medicaid is available for folks who truly don't have the resources to pay for their nursing home care. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes, that's very educational, all of that, and the alimony, and that the state will never leave an heir, in debt. That's very helpful, because people do, adult children will sweat about that, because a lot of times the costs are so high. Unfortunately for Medicaid, the eligibility is really high. It's hard to get eligibility. And persons who are on the lower scale, they can make eligibility lower, but it's always that middle income that really have the toughest time.
You're absolutely right. It's the middle class squeeze. Our really wealthy folks in society, they can private pay. Nursing home Louisiana averages about $5,500 a month. If you have the means, that may not be a hardship. And then, of course, our people who are obviously disadvantaged, Medicaid is going to scoop in and take care of those folks. As an attorney, there are things that we can do to help get people qualified. We address it on an asset by asset basis. There are things that you can move around. You can reposition your assets. Sometimes you may need to turn an asset into income to meet the rules. So I don't ever want a person who is our average middle class person. And again, I typically think of it in the context of a spouse, because it would be nice to leave an inheritance behind for our children. But the real crisis is if we have a well spouse at home. We can't leave our well spouse destitute. If the kids don't inherit, let's hope our kids have grown and built their own lives and their own wealth. But there are things that you can do. There are estate attorneys that can handle that for you. I work with a planner, a financial planner out of North Louisiana, that's his job, is qualifying people for long-term care. So I don't want people to feel like it's hopeless, and it would certainly be worth a consult before you rule that out. I mean, I had a couple come to me just a few months ago that was in that exact situation. The other thing, if we have a moment to talk about, is Medicaid recovery. A lot of people worry. I mean, my mother went through this when we thought my father might be facing long-term care. Oh my gosh, the government's going to take my house. Let me tell you how that works, okay? So to get somebody qualified for Medicaid, of course, we have to have a medical need. There are certain income requirements and there's certain asset requirements. So if you meet all of those, great, we can get you in. However, the government has stepped up its recovery, because as you can imagine, that $5,500 a month, that racks up a big debt, that puts a big strain on the system. So there have been mandates that say that's pushing the Medicaid program to go and recover. So for instance, if we did take the example of a spouse, We have the well spouse, and we have the spouse who needed care who was in the nursing home. The spouse in the nursing home passes away. The surviving spouse is going to get a letter. Dear, Mr. Jones, we're so sorry to hear about the passing of your wife. She was in the nursing home for 1 year. We spent $65,000 for her care. And that letter is going to say something to the effect of, don't worry, you're okay for now. But when you pass away, we're going to recover from your estate. And that may not be a letter you want to get, but nobody is going to come and push Mr. Jones out of the house and take it away from him. So that's a really common myth that I see. And I always want to reduce people's anxiety about that. They're not going to come and kick you out. There are a lot of things, even if you have an adult child who's been living in the house for a certain period of time, they won't recover it. If the house is not a very low value, if it's a lower value compared with the average home price in that area, they're not going to do recovery. So I don't want people to think that it's all gloom and doom and, oh my gosh, my spouse was in the nursing home, now I'm going to be homeless. That's not how it works. I always want to ratchet down people's anxiety. That said, I would always recommend that somebody at least get a consult with a professional to see if there's anything that they can do to help you get qualified and to prevent that recovery, to reposition those assets ahead of time.
Planning. A lot of our viewers by now have probably learned about the 5-year look back, that Medicaid does. And so they're probably trying to time that as well. But I always tell them, they will find it. If you're going to hide resources, Medicaid will find it. And that's what I've always heard. So that's
they will.
And plan.
Right. We don't ever want to be dishonest on an application. I would be, ethically, legally, morally unable to help someone with that. That being said, there are still things that you can do. It's very easy if I have someone who's a member of a couple to get them qualified. So the 5-year look back, just for folks who don't know, if you are applying for Medicaid to pay for your nursing home, they want to know, what have you done with your money for 5 years? You could have taken a trip around the world 3 times and spent it all. You could have gone to the casino boat and gambled it all away. There's lots of, not nonsensical ways you could have spent the money. But if you legitimately spent it and it's gone, that's one thing. The things you can't do are give it away. I can't give it to charity. I can't give it to my children. I can't give it to my friends. There is one giveaway that you can. You can give it to your spouse. And again, and not everybody's married, and we can still help people who are not married. But if you, again, I see so many concerned spouses who I can't keep my husband or wife at home. I'm worried about them. I'm anxious. I can't keep them. I feel like I've failed. I'm nervous about their next step, but I'm also worried about my own finances because, oh my gosh, I'm going to expend all my resources. So those people can be very easily helped. And you can gift to the well spouse, and there is no penalty. That doesn't qualify under the 5-year look back. There are a few limits on it. It's not an unlimited amount, but that's always a tool. But again, if your ailing spouse, if your spouse in need of care didn't have the POA or didn't already sign over those resources, then we're kind of stuck. So what that power of attorney does, my powers of attorney always have what's called a self-dealing provision, where that agent can take the other person's stuff and give it to themselves. That's a very important part of it. And that's not always included in powers of attorney. I think most lawyers and a lot of notaries have really come around to see that as being very important. But again, that's the linchpin. If you suspect you or a loved one have a problem, if you're early in that diagnosis, can be a really important thing.
And that's called a self-dealing provision?
Self-dealing, the ability to self-deal. And it is one thing that does need to be specifically listed out in Louisiana. There are about 5 provisions that have to be specifically listed. The ability to sell real estate is one of them, the self-dealing, and I'm kind of blanking on the other 2. But yes, it needs to be specifically mentioned that my agent has the ability to self-deal. So what happens is the well spouse will come in and sign the act of donation, let's say giving the house to himself, but he signs off on behalf of his wife using the power of attorney, and then he signs to receive in his own name. And we've transferred that asset, and we can protect that for the future.
Wow.
From recovery.
This has been this is very educational for me. One more thing I wanted to ask about is sometimes in the family there's an agreement that Joey stays at home and he will be there taking care of mom. So mom will be paying him. And what I've always learned is there's a personal care contract that you can draw up that has to be very, very detailed, and the expense, it has to be comparable what you pay somebody in the community. It has to be scheduled on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and exactly how much money they'll make. And that is how somebody can pay their loved one to be their caregiver. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely, and that is a great tool. It's called a caregiver agreement. And again, when we're looking at what is going to pass muster with Medicaid, that contract has to be in place before you pay someone. So if my son has been taking care of me for the last 3 years and I've been paying him to do it, but I didn't have that contract in place, that's not going to count. That's going to count as me giving him money. However, if I have that caregiver agreement in place, then it will pass muster with Medicaid as long as it meets those provisions that you mentioned, that it's in line with what we would be paying a professional caregiver if we had that contract in place. So that's another tool if someone does get a diagnosis or is really, again, as long as that person has capacity or a power of attorney to sign that agreement, and you're doing the things you would be doing for your loved one anyway, and what you can do. Because when you go in on Medicaid, do you know how much money they let you keep? They let you keep $38 a month. You can't do much with that. Now, if you have a spouse, you can attribute some of your income to the spouse. The spouse is allowed to have, I think, $3,600 a month. So it's not like they're going to scoop it. But what happens a lot of times is it's a partial payment from Medicaid, and the family will have to contribute something to round out and cover the entire nursing home bill. But that caregiver agreement, I'm glad you brought that up. That's an amazing tool, because you can either pay your children or your loved ones to do things that we're going to do for you anyway, or if you were paying them, it's going to be Medicaid compliant. What a lot of my families are going to do, some people that have to be brought around, they get indignant, that's my dad. I don't need to be paid to take care of my dad. I would take care of my dad anyway. And that's not the idea, because what you can do is, it does count for income for the child or the caregiver who's doing it. It is income, and you do need to report it as such. But what people will do a lot of times is they'll segregate that money in a separate account and say, okay, dad's been paying me to mow the lawn, to do his grocery shopping, drive him to the doctor. You can even claim mileage. And dad's paying me. I have to report that on my income tax, and I may take the taxes out, but I segregated that into a separate account to say, okay, when dad, if we do need to do a spend down or whatever, this money, it's technically legally mine, but that's a pot of money that I'm going to use to take care of dad when he needs it. Because if he's only got $38, I mean, I can't buy somebody new slippers for that. When we think of somebody's personal care needs, is that even going to take care of somebody's grooming? So that's a pot of money that you've saved from recovery. You've legitimately spent it. When we think about inheritance down the road, it can be divvied up, but it can also be used for care for that person later down the road. And again, you got to be really careful with your accounting and whatnot. But that is another excellent tool that I highly recommend.
This is really good. I'm so glad this is being recorded so other people will be able to hear this. And you really do give some, there's a sense of relief, I feel, hearing you, that there are still ways, because people, if you're poor or you're wealthy, and it's the middle class, but there are some options, is what I hear you saying. So
Absolutely.
that's some relief. Well, I was worried that we were, that we were going to run out of questions, but we have some, we've just had some really good dialogue here. We do have some questions from the viewers, and I want to get back. I know there's been some discussion here online on the chat box about a gun and what to do with that. Maybe Sergeant, could you tell us a little bit about, Sergeant Howard, could you tell us a little bit about what you are recommending?
Yes. The question was in reference to someone that with dementia or Alzheimer's who have a gun in their home or in their possession. And the most important thing is safety. A lot of times people, especially where we are here in the South, people are very protective of their guns. Now, if it's someone who suffer from dementia, who happens to be a gun buff prior to them being diagnosed with dementia, it may be kind of difficult taking a gun from them. Okay. The main thing is what are their intentions with the gun? Now we're going to go with possession first. If they actually have the gun in their possession. Now, if they have the gun in their possession and they've always one of those that carry their guns and like their guns and they keep it on their hip, they're not threatening anybody. They're not threatening themselves. You have to be very, very delicate when dealing with that type of issue. If in your mind you feel that at some point, because they've made some violent statements or have said some things that concern you, and you feel that it's probably necessary to stop anything from happening in the future. So you, in your mind, you feel you want to remove those guns from them. One of the easiest and smartest things that you can do, because most people are not going to keep their guns on the 24/7, is remove the bullets from the gun.
Mhm.
So if you're taking the bullets out, of course they can't use it. But one thing you have to be aware of is the fact that at some point you're probably gonna have to explain once they know the bullets are not in there. If it's someone who's a gun buff, then they may know that, that their bullets are missing. But on another in another case, they may not. They may not even recognize that the bullets are gone. They may just feel safe keeping that gun on them without checking it. If that's the case, you may be okay. But in another case, if they are aware that my bullets are gone, you may have to explain why the bullets are gone out of their gun, or what happened to their bullets. So that's you dealing with your caregiver and you dealing with the person who has dementia. You just have to be cognizant of the type of personality or the type of person that you're dealing with. Is it going to cause them to become agitated? Is it going to make the situation worse? Is it worth it? So that's one thing that you can be aware of. But taking the gun out, putting the bullets in a safe location, you may want to explain to them that, and that's the way that we even suggest people keep their guns, keeping the bullets in one location and keeping the gun in another location. If you're asleep and something happens and you just jump up and grab your gun and start shooting, that may be a problem. So we kind of try to get people, unless you're familiar with the gun and know how to deal with it, probably try to avoid them keeping the bullets in the gun. So you may want to explain to them that that's just a safer way to keep it. You're not trying to take their gun. You're just trying to figure out a safer way that we can keep the gun. If they just have guns in the house and they're not keeping up with them, if they're not one of those people that my gun is here, I know every day, they looking at their gun, they picking up the gun, they know where that gun is. If they're not that type of person, it may be easier for you to remove the gun from the home, keep it at your home, put it in a safe location. Again, take the bullets out, and they may not even miss the fact that it's gone.
So definitely plan ahead how you plan to explain this and why you're doing it.
Right. Definitely. You definitely may have to explain that to some, to certain people sometime. But again, some people that the gun is not a part of their everyday life, so they may not even miss the fact that you decided to remove the gun from the house. But we just have to understand that just because there's a gun there doesn't mean there's a problem. People keep guns for various reasons, but if that person have never threatened anyone, have never threatened themselves, have never made statements about using a gun for whatever reason, nefarious reasons, you may not even want to dig into that. You may not even want to worry about trying to remove the gun from the house or from them if they never. Now, but when it comes to the point where they're threatening with it, if they have it on their person and they're threatening someone with it or they threaten themselves, that's when you call law enforcement and get law enforcement involved so we can handle that situation. And make sure, one of the early questions again about law enforcement having the information. If you are calling and this person has dementia, make sure you let the law enforcement know that, and it's going to be documented. So if we ever have to come out to that house again to deal with with that same person, or even just come into that house. The law enforcement officer that's dispatched to that call is going to have the information that we've been out to that house prior, because a person in the house has dementia and he has done A, B, or C, or this is that person's demeanor. This is that person keeps guns in the house. You know, we'll have that information.
Certainly, and we owe you that. We owe the police officers that information, so they're well prepared when they go in. Thank you so much. We have time for like one quick question, and we had a question, Dr. Keller. This is the question. I am concerned about our children getting Alzheimer's disease since their father and his father have both had it. Children's ages are 46, 41, and 38. What is available for them now or in the near future? Well, we talked a little bit about what is available, but I think they're also concerned about the possibility of inheriting Alzheimer's. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, and again, I just want to say thanks to everybody, including Sergeant Howard. Learned a lot today. Appreciate being a part of this. So the Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia and accounts for a little over 60%. Between 5 and 8% of those are early onset, which means it happens before the age of 65. And we heard about an incident of that earlier today. And so generally people that get, if you have an immediate family member, a sibling, if you have a sibling or a parent, not a grandparent, that had the onset of Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, there's dozens and dozens of them. If they had that onset before the age of 65, you are at a much higher risk to develop a dementia. If it's after the age of 65, you know, particularly people 75 and 80 and upwards, the chances of inheritance is much, much less. But the inherited forms are you know, just rare. They're rare. That being said, there's genetic predisposition for hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, and all of those things are also linked to the development of dementia. And so, so there's still genetic risk outside of just being straight up, you know, at risk for dementia. Your risk factors also can be genetic. And so, so that's generally how I answer that question.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, that under 65, there's a higher possibility.
Yeah,
Okay.
highly likely. Yeah.
Yes, highly likely. Okay, thank you very much. Well, we're right at, you know, we only have a few minutes left. I want to say thank you first off to the panel. This has been great. I mean, I think that we all learned a lot from all of the different experts on the panel. And I want to thank the viewers because you had some good questions and appreciate you attending. And I didn't get to a lot of the questions in the chat because I think that I'm afraid that we're going to go over, but thank you all for coming. And Ellen, I want to say, I think that Alzheimer's Services should do this again. This has been very helpful.
I was just thinking the same, Gina. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to the panel. This has been awesome. Learned so many new things today. And like Gina said, I'm glad we were able to record it so that we can, you know, pass this on to caregivers that couldn't join us today. So thank you so much for everyone for being here. And I just want to, as we are finishing up, you know, the month of November and Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, I want to just give another thank you to our sponsors that have helped to make this whole month for us possible. And they are Dupree Pharmacy, Keen Miller, Azalea Estates, Ascension Oaks, Hospice in His Care, Our Lady of the Lake Ascension, and Notre Dame Hospice. And again, thank you so much to everyone today. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, panelists. And I hope to see you guys next time on our next event. So thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Have a good day.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah.